Juanita, last time we talked, we were talking about the work that you do and how you help people who need to rewire their brain.
Yes, and it seems like your work is has some significant differences in that direction as well. You
Yeah,
know, you're talking about people who are trying to break free from that trauma bond and change their lives significantly. So yeah,
yeah.
what my work
Oh,
research
we sound.
what I work on is the idea that if we understand what's happening inside of our brains and some of the neural pathways that we take just because we're human, then with that understanding, we can then purposefully and mindfully change our behavior. We can interrupt those pathways and choose to send them in a different direction and create better, more productive, more peace, happiness, contentment inducing directions in our thinking.
That is very cool. So let me ask you, if I were a client of yours and I came to you and I was like, I am in an abusive relationship. And every time I talk with my partner, we get into a fight, and I just go into this fight, flight, or freeze or fawn mode, and I can't even say what I want to say. I am not able to set healthy boundaries. I'm not able to stand up for myself. I'm kind of afraid. Um, and I just get pulled into a conflict cycle and like word salad arguments. And I don't want to, but my body just like clamps up and I feel like things are coming out of my mouth and I'm not even in control of what I'm saying and I can't stop. How do I stop reacting in this way so that I am able to have some more healthy boundaries and be more in control of my reactions? Because I know I can't control the other person.
Well, a lot of those things that you just said right there are the start of it. When somebody recognizes that they're doing these things and they recognize that they're in that situation and they desire a change, that's when change can start. So what you've just put forth there is somebody who has already come to the table with the realization of, I want these changes and I have been incapable of reaching those at this point. So, you know, with the neural pathways that's happening is people's brains are basically programmed from several different things. They have genetics, they have what they have experienced in their lives, their environment, and the pathways have been laid down, and the flow will continue along those pathways unless there's an interruption. And the big part of that interruption is that recognition that I'm doing it again. You know,
Mm-hmm.
just that momentary, um, I'm starting to be drawn into that cycle moment, and then employing some skills to think differently about it and to choose differently. When you're in a relationship with somebody who, like a narcissistic person, that's their goal is to draw you into that state and to keep you into that state, that's even more difficult to work with because they're going to work against every
Mm-hmm.
strategy that you put in place to try to make you go back into this flow of which they have been part of programming you for.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very difficult place for someone to be in, and without some breaking free from it and having the ability to have that moment of pause, sometimes that's all it takes is just that moment of pause and being able to redirect the thoughts and just say, no, I'm going to think differently about this.
So it's like a recognition and then almost like a labeling in your mind, like, oh, this is happening, whatever you call it in your head.
Yes.
So that's kind of what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Well,
So
I'll give you a little bit of research base to help you to understand a little bit on what exactly is happening as far as the strengthening of the synapses. When a signal goes from one nerve cell in your brain to another one, there's a strength in that synapses that happens
can
that then
you can
releases
you
the.
tell us what synapses is actually? Because I've heard that word a lot, but maybe you can um, define it or give us a loose
So the
description.
way we could get into some really deep science in this, and I wish I had some visual aids to show you.
I do too. I was going to
That would
ask
make
you
life
if you
so
had
much
like a,
easier if it's share screen and show you a good visual aid.
yeah, I would love to see that.
Let me think if I have one handy. I might. Let me look and see if I do.
Because
That would
while
be
you're
fun.
doing that, I feel like there's a lot of stuff that I'm seeing now that I didn't see even a couple of years ago about how to rewire your brain, and that there's neuroplasticity, and
Well,
that
let me
you
talk about
can.
neuroplasticity for a minute,
Mhm.
because that's a
Yeah.
really good one, Liz.
Mm.
People believe, because of the research and what we were raised at, that once we reach adult status, that our brains can't be changed anymore, that we lose our plasticity, and how we are is how we are, and we just have to deal with it. And the research has now proven that that is not true. And as a matter of fact, you change the pathways in your brain every single day. You strengthen the connections between your different cells in your brain every day. And that goes right back into what I was going to tell you about the strengthening between the cells is basically how we learn. When we have a connection that's going from A to B, and that pathway is repeated over and over and over, that's basically the path of least resistance. Like a river flowing down from a mountainside, it's going to flow in the direction of the path of least resistance, of where you have strengthened that. And when you learn something new, you actually create a new connection between, like, say, A and C. So now you have A and B that's still going on, but now you've learned A and C. And as you reinforce A and C over and over, A and B diminishes. It doesn't ever go away, but it diminishes. So you can look at it as being like A to C in the first place was like a dirt pathway. And the
Mhm.
more you did it, the more it strengthened, the more it became a 6-lane highway, paved, and everything goes that way now. Whereas B used to be that, and now it's reduced down to the dirt pathway. That's literally the process of learning. So we have gone through all of these things in our life where we have grown up and been taught by our parents and our caregivers, and the religious experiences that we have as we're growing up. And then we get into adulthood and we continue these experiences. And people who get into negative relationships, like the kind of people that you work with, that is the exact same thing, that they start getting more of this programming laid in,
Mhm.
to where the expected behaviors, the people who are perpetrating those behaviors upon them know exactly what to do to cause the flow to go on those pathways. And then you have the people like you were describing to me, I'm caught in this cycle and I can't break free. And I keep doing the things that I'm doing. That's because you're heading down that pathway over
Mhm.
and over and over. And the very first thing you have to do is recognize that. You have to understand that the flow is happening because that's how it's laid down. And then you have to choose that you're going to do something different. And
So,
just the fact that you're paying attention to it reroutes it from the pathways through the different structures in your brain to your prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex up here is the section that sets us apart from the animal world. This is the part that allows us to do our decision making and our thinking and our contemplating about things. And when we interrupt that flow, we send it to the prefrontal cortex. Now we have the opportunity to say, what do I want to do different? Or, no, this time I'm not going to holler. This time I'm going to respond calmly.
mhm.
And in healthy relationships, these things happen, and there's a healthy response and a reinforcement and a change of behaviors. In the unhealthy relationship, the person is really in a position where they have to reinforce themselves, and they have to keep going despite what's going to be coming at them from the other person. The best way, of course, is to not have that happening.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about a lot of stuff, and I want to kind of like pause for a minute and go back and talk and pull out some of the specific things you were saying. So we're talking about a flow. You described it as a flow, like something is happening, and your brain if you've been making the same choices or the same thought patterns, it's going to go like down the well-worn path rather than the path that you haven't really like worn
It
grooves
may
into,
not even exist yet.
that may not even exist yet. So it sounds like it's a matter of making the same choice over and over and over again and wearing in a groove, right? So if you've got water going down and there's a fork, if it's used to going this way, it's going to go that way, and you've got to keep it
You
good.
have to
You've got to
strengthen
like
it.
you have to
Right.
strengthen it this way and make this one bigger, deeper, so that the water flows to that
Right.
way. Is that kind of a good way to
Yes.
think about
And you
what's
have to
happening?
and you have to not be mad at yourself when you don't go that way,
Mm,
because that's, if you're building this one, the strength is still going to be on the other one. So if you follow that one, take a deep breath and give yourself a break and understand this is a process.
mhm.
And the next time, choose the other direction. And the more you do it, the stronger it gets, the easier it gets.
So it's almost like practice. So I don't know if you know this about me, but I am a musician, right? And the way that you get better at being a musician is you practice, right? You do the
Right.
same things over and 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 over again, like in the same way that you do with learning a sport, right? Or a language. And is that the same thing that's happening? It's just doing the same thing over and over and over again, like wearing like little pathways in your brain
The,
or
a musician is one of the best examples there is out there, because it's complicated and you have to learn it and you have to do it repeatedly. And the more
Mhm.
you do it repeatedly, the easier it is. And yet you still have to put your attention on it to make sure that it comes out perfect.
Yeah.
Musicians practice endlessly in order
Mhm.
to make it come out right. So
Right.
yeah,
And
that's a
then it just
beautiful
becomes
example.
almost second nature so that you can
Then
play
it's
it.
happening more automatically.
Right. And that's where you want to get, right? So that when you're under stress, when you are on stage auditioning or you have a big solo and your mind starts like being in this stressed state, if your mind starts freaking out, your body is still going to know what to do, right?
Right. Right.
And probably like I always think about that when I watch like gymnasts or people who are doing dives or throwing free throws or whatever, it's like you have to have done that so many times that even if there's all a bunch of new shit coming on that's really freaking you out, it's just like in your
You can think
brain
about
is kind of
Olympians. Olympians
mhm.
dedicate their lives to perfecting their sport. That's what they do. And there's
So
nothing else but that for them, because they're working so diligently on honing all of those skills, not just from a physical perspective, but from a mental perspective as well.
So when you is this are we talking about, can we go back to the like the physiology of the brain, right?
Mhm.
So you were talking about the prefrontal cortex, right?
Right.
And that's like, is that where like your cognitive reasoning and stuff happens?
Well,
Is that
this
what
this
happens
is
there?
this is the section of the brain up here. We have our mammalian brain. That's the same as animals. And then
Uh-huh.
what sets us apart from the mammalian brain is this prefrontal cortex up here that we have that they do not. And it's also where we house what we call the executive function. And
Okay.
the
Right.
executive function is the area where we're able to be human.
So that's happening up here, and in the back is the amygdala, is that right? And that's
Now
where
that
like,
the amygdala is actually more into the center of the brain,
oh, okay.
but it's kind of deep within the center of the brain here. And there's a lot of circuitry that goes to the amygdala. There's a lot of circuitry that connects from different portions of the brain through the amygdala. And the amygdala is the portion of the brain that is complicit in the anger part of our emotions. And there's a lot of pathways that take an automatic path through the amygdala. And one of the things that happens when you interrupt one of those pathways is you can picture it as here's this signal coming down, and all of a sudden you interrupt it and it goes whoop and goes off to the prefrontal cortex instead of going through the
Mm,
amygdala. And now you can do something totally different with it because you haven't activated that anger center of your brain.
Right. So, and then, and what part of the brain like once you have something in your muscle memory, as they say, where is that going on in your brain?
Well, if you're talking about physical muscle memory, you're talking about the part of the brain up here, which controls our physical movements. If you're talking about it in more of a theoretical sense, where we're talking about how we do our responses and some of the emotions that we hear, that's more toward the center of the brain, and it's in our limbic system and our amygdala and with our hypothalamus and some areas of or structures in the brain there.
Okay. So let me ask you this. I'm going to go off on another little tangent. When we are trauma bonded, as they say, when somebody is in a relationship with somebody who's abusive, or if somebody has Stockholm syndrome, part of what's going on there is this like neuropathway thing that we were talking about. But my understanding is also that even though it seems counterintuitive to be in a relationship with somebody who's abusive towards you, there's something that is going on in your brain, in your deep brain, that's not your cognitive part of your brain, but that is telling you that you are safer in this kind of relationship than you would be leaving it, right? And it has maybe something to do with the way that your brain is functioning. Does it have anything to do with hormones that are secreted, or like the stress hormone, or the the other one, like what are the ones that make you feel good?
Probably all of the above. You can probably check mark all of those boxes for what's going on. Now, the field of neuroscience it's still in its baby stages, even though it seems to be so prevalent and out there and big things. There's been a lot of information come through, but it's still in its baby stages. And there's a lot of things that neuroscience still can't answer. And a lot of what you just described there is really cognition, more than it is the basis of the neuroscience. It's not like we can go in and say, well, this is what's happening with that pathway, so let's just zap it and change it. That kind of science just doesn't exist yet. But there's definitely the cognitive side that says, these things are happening. And from a cognitive point of view, we can say that the parasympathetic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system are being activated in different ways to cause these thoughts that from any outsider's view you would say, no, you're not safer. Can't you see that? And yet from the inside view, from what's going on inside of them, they're not seeing it that way, or feeling it that way, or experiencing it that way.
Right, because I think that people who are domestic abuse survivors have a hard time, I think, trying to explain why they're still in a relationship with somebody to other people, because it doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense to live with somebody.
To the outsiders, it doesn't.
Right.
But to the person who's inside of it, it does.
Or it might not even, like, I know that there are a lot of cases where people, like, if they try to describe it, they're like, I know it doesn't make sense. This person's hitting me, or this person is financially abusing me, but I'm still here. And you ask them why, and I see people who are like, well, I don't know, I still love him, or they just shut down, or they don't really know how to explain it, or they blame themselves. Like, it's probably something that I'm doing, and maybe if I'm just a better
Liz, why is
person.
a tough question? Why is a question that tends to put people on the defensive? So when people think about why am I doing this, they do that to themselves. It's probably better to think about questions that would be more like, how could this be different? What would it be like if it was different? And explore from that direction and see if they can break free on that thinking into some more understanding and ability to change how they're doing their lives.
Yeah. Well, and it takes a while, I think, for people who are in those kinds of relationships to get to the point where they do want to get out. I mean, another thing that I see is I talk to people and they're clearly unhappy, but they're not ready to move on yet. And I wonder if there's like a neurological reason for that, or if it's just um, yeah. What's your take
Well,
on
in my
that?
personal opinion, I think that emotions are so powerful, and
Mhm.
emotions can bind us into things, and they can produce a where you're actually living in a way that were you to sit down and write it out on paper, it wouldn't look like that at all. And
Mhm.
yet you're bound to that through the emotional. I call it being a hostage to your emotions.
Yeah.
And I actually lived like that for a while in my life as well. And when it ended, I was released. At first it was difficult. It was one of the most difficult times of my life that I had to go through. And yet in the long run, over the long term, I was able to understand that, oh, I'm so much better for not being in that when I was
Yeah.
being held
Oh,
emotionally
yeah.
hostage by my own emotions. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's definitely the psychological aspect that that you stay where you are because it's not explainable, but how do you get out of it?
Yeah. So let me ask you this. So when you work with clients, um, do you generally have people who are coming to you for the same types of things, or do people come to you with all kinds of issues, all kinds of different issues, and the way that you work with them is pretty much the same, regardless of their issues, because what you're doing with them is helping them identify behavior patterns and teaching them how to shift them? Is that
Well, you've done a great job of explaining it.
okay?
And yeah, I do see people for a variety of reasons. Now, and what I do is coaching, which is a little bit different than counseling. Counseling will delve into what's been going on in your past and any type of, the abnormal behavior things and work to overcome that.
Mhm.
Whereas coaching more takes a view from where are you today and where are we going, where do we want to go, and work toward reaching that. Now, my specific focus, which is using neuroscience, is meant to help you to develop that awareness so that then you can intentionally change the direction of where you're going. And my focus is on happiness. My focus is on people finding this level of contentment and joy and happiness that they didn't think was possible before, where they felt like, they're just going through life, careening down the highway, bouncing off the guardrails, just totally out of control and not able to direct their lives in such a manner that they can actually experience happiness. And so what I do is I work with people through my program to understand some of the concepts in neuroscience that explains why we do some of the behaviors that we do
Mhm.
and the ways that we can intervene on that so that then we can change our behavior and reach a state of mind where we can find that contentment, joy, peace, and happiness. And that's not just fleeting. That's something that is there even when those hard times come in. So like you were talking about earlier, that you change that little rut in the road into something that's, a lot more viable, that there's a lot of traffic now traveling on that road. So when you
Mhm.
do get an interruption again, you can be like, oh yeah, okay. And then you can stay on your path and view life in such a way that you maintain that state of being in contentment and happiness that you've worked your way toward.
Yeah. So when you so when what's the first thing you do with people when they come to you?
Well, the first thing that we do is talk about, in my program, we have the very specific modules that go through particular neuroscience concepts of what's going on in the brain. But the very first thing that I do with people is I help them to define what is their definition of happiness. Because
Mhm.
everybody's definition is different. If I told you, hey Liz, I'm happy today, you would share this emotion with me, because that's another thing. Emotions are contagious. So
Mm-hmm.
we can share this emotion with each other, but happiness for you might be very, very different than what happiness for me is. So the very first thing we do is we really define what does happiness mean for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can start working, understanding those concepts in the brain and moving toward what happiness means for you.
And what does that look like?
What do the programs look like?
Well, like, yeah, like how do you help them move towards that? If they're like, okay, happiness is I don't have to stress about stuff. I have my family around me. I you know, have a good job, have a good relationship. Like those are probably things that most people would say, right?
And where do you not have those? Do you have an area of your life where that isn't? On, like, say, on a scale of 1 to 10, you were to take those things, is there anything that you wouldn't rate a 10?
Yeah.
Okay. So the way that I would do coaching with somebody is we would then explore that area. We would say, okay, what would you rate it at? Now let's talk about where it's at, where you want it, where do you want it, and how are we going to get it there? So one of the things about coaching is that people have the answers within them.
Uh-huh.
And so they just need somebody to help them to see it differently, which is literally the neural pathways in your brain.
Mm.
You need the opportunity to broaden your perspective and see things differently. And that's what's called the aha moment, when you're like, oh, well, I never thought of it that way before.
Yeah.
Now you have a different way of doing it. Now you're starting right there to lay down a new pathway.
So, and so then do you give them exercises to practice that over and over again, the way that I might practice an etude or something?
Well, you're going to. Once you've discovered something different going in a direction that you want to go, you're going to do it over again. It's not where I tell you, well, go practice this now.
Uh-huh.
And keep doing it. You're going to. Now, once you've had that moment of elucidation, you've had your aha moment, then you've already laid down that pathway and you're going to think about it. Maybe there's times that you need some reminders, and we could do something, like you can always put a note up on your mirror or a reminder in your pocket so that when you reach in there, you feel it and you're like, oh yeah, there's all sorts of different things. You can engage in meditation and some other methods that will help you to focus your thoughts and to keep them going in a certain way. But it's not necessarily something that I would say, okay, now go do this. You're going to decide what you want to do. We'll put those in place, and then I'll help to be accountability and to help you lay down some more pathways and some more direction that you want to go.
So do you have a sense of like time frame for people who are like, I want to stop, I want to have more gratitude, or I want to stop having mean thoughts about my mom or whatever, or whatever it is that they have these neuropathways going this way, but that isn't serving them anymore, and they want to go this way. So they start thinking more in terms of these things. Is there any research about like how long it takes?
It takes 2 weeks. It takes 2 months. You'll be all fixed.
Yeah.
I wish it was that simple, but it's not. It's the human brain that we're working with. And so the first thing that has to happen is you have to become aware, and you have to change that direction. And then you have to do it repeatedly. Now, let's say you're in a situation where you fixate on something and you do it multiple times every single day. And you start putting out the work and the effort to change that. And you start interrupting those thoughts, and you start building a different pathway multiple times in a day, so that every time you start thinking about it, you're like, nope, not going to, and you start doing something different. Well, then you might see some changes rather rapidly. But then somebody who doesn't experience that situation as frequently, so let's say, you don't like your mother-in-law, but you don't think about it until they come to visit. Maybe you don't get as much time to work on it to change exactly what it takes to change your internal pathways, broaden it into something that happens more readily without thinking about it.
That makes a lot of sense. So I'm sure that you know what cognitive behavioral therapy is, right? Is
Yes.
this sort of similar? Or
Yes.
DBT or is it, what's it called? DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy?
It's similar in the sense that it is cognition.
Mm-hmm.
It is similar in that we're attempting to change what's happening in the brain with thoughts, with patterns, with thinking.
Okay.
And from the perspective that I bring, it's literally understanding what's happening from the neuroscience perspective, but it's still cognitive thinking.
Right.
Absolutely. We don't
Okay.
have anything beyond that yet. There's been
Yeah.
tremendous advances in just coming to the understanding that we don't have set plasticity, that we're changing our brains all the time. And by coming to that understanding, what's happened in the last few generations, not even generations, really, it's pretty much been more our generation, that we're actually able to change more of it.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's
I
so
should
cool.
say decades on there,
Yeah.
because
Eh,
the Freudian view was very, very different. And
mhm.
now that we understand that we're not fixed, that this flow of emotions, that these ideas are changeable, and we have some more understanding about where they're going through the different structures of the brain, we're able to intervene, but not in the sense of going in there and like lobotomizing sections or removing structures or anything like that. We're not to that point yet.
Right. But you can see like if you do MRIs of people's brains, I
Well,
think,
it's called an
like
fMRI
fMRI. Okay.
when you're dealing with the brain, with looking at what's going on in the brain. And the F means functioning, so it's a functional
Oh, okay.
MRI, and it's actually used to watch what's going on. And that's where we've learned a lot about the different pathways. At this point in
Mm-hmm.
time, we're pretty much just observers in the
Mm-hmm.
game of neuroscience, because we can see that it's happening, and we can say, oh, look, when we give people these kind of exercises to think about, then it's activating the uh, structures between the dorsal media part of the prefrontal cortex down to another structure, and oh wow, that's happening. But then how do you go in and either suppress that or excite that? That's not something that the science has taken us to the point of being able to do yet. However, we can change that with thought structures. We do know how to do that way, and that's cognitively.
So that's so cool. And so let me ask you this. Um, can you talk a little bit about neurofeedback and how this relates to what you're doing, or is it so too different, or
And
what's
tell me
what?
exactly what you mean by the neurofeedback.
So neurofeedback is like you can get your like electrodes put on your head, right? And they can attach it to a computer and you can see brain waves. Am I right so far?
Yes.
Okay. And so the idea behind neurofeedback, therapeutic neurofeedback or whatever you call it, is that a therapist can use this ability to look at your brain waves in conjunction with talk therapy to help. Is it rewiring in the same way that we're talking about rewiring your brain? Is it having to do with
It's actually
neuroplasticity?
just looking at what we're doing,
Okay.
with it's still cognitive because you're dealing with the talk therapy, but you're actually just looking and seeing what's happening with it.
As you're going
So
along.
I'm not sure that there's any way, even if we just put some electrodes on our brain and take a look that way, that we can actually see all of the different changes that are taking place. We might be able to see the changes, but do we really understand what all of them are doing? It's a wide area of research right now.
And so whatever it is that they're looking at when they're doing neurofeedback is different. You're seeing different things than you see if you're doing an fMRI.
I think it would be similar.
Okay, but it's like if you're looking at a fMRI, you're looking at like an actual scan of your physical brain, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you're like seeing different
While
parts of
you're
your
doing an
brain,
activity.
right, lighting up and all of that. And when
Mhm.
when they're doing like the electrodes on
They're,
your head, that's a
and they're getting more of the waves
they're getting the
on that.
waves, right?
It's just another method. We don't have super good ways of looking at, but the fMRI really renovated our ability to even look at which sections of the brain are active during different
Hmm.
behaviors and
Right.
activities.
That's
So
so
it's
cool.
huge. The advancements are humongous. And yet I think about it that we're still barely scratching the surface.
Yeah.
There's so much more for us to understand and learn about it in different ways that that we need to be able to look at it. But I've also, I'm a firm believer that when there's a gap and we need it, that's when innovation steps in.
Hmm.
And so my hope is that hopefully in my lifetime that they come up with a lot of different ways to be able to be looking even deeper into the brain and figuring out exactly what we can do with it.
Yeah. It's
In the
so
meantime,
interesting.
we have to rely on our cognition.
Right, 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 right. We have to use the tools that we've got available to us. But
Exactly.
I think like one of my big takeaways is that we're not stuck. You know, we're
We are
not
not. As
stuck
a matter of fact, we
developmentally.
change, Liz, every single day. We write pathways in our brain every day. So it's not about whether you can or can't do this. It's about understanding what's happening, harnessing it, and making it work for you. Because you're going
Yeah.
to do it anyway.
Yeah, you might as well have some intention around it. So, we've been talking for a while and I could just keep talking about this forever. I have one other thing that I want to talk about, and then I want to ask you about your program and how people can find you and give you a chance to plug your stuff. Because I want
Shamelessly,
people
right?
shamelessly, because I want people to be able to come and find you and work with you because I think that this it's so powerful, and I think that people who are like stuck in relationships feel stuck, right? And don't know that that the power is in themselves, right?
Right,
And they can like let go of wishing that the other person would change because that is just a fool's errand. It's not going to happen, right? They're only people who can change those people are those people, right? But that
right.
doesn't mean that you can't start working on yourself and taking ownership of that. And
The
that
only
it's
person you can change is yourself.
right,
You
and you
have
can
no
change,
power
and you
over
can
anyone
change
else.
it. You can change it, and it's not going to be easy, and it's going to be really uncomfortable, right? I mean, it's really
Well,
hard to make
sometimes,
changes.
sometimes there can be some discomfort because, but I think most of the discomfort is when you return to a behavior pattern that you'd rather change versus the
Mm,
feeling like there's discomfort moving to a new pattern. Typically moving to a new pattern feels good. That's what you
yeah.
want to do. That's where you want to go.
Well, ideally, yeah. I mean, I know though, like for myself, it's scary. It was scary for me to like move out of the comfort of a stressful relationship because it was what I was used to. And this other thing over here was like, I don't know what that's going to be like, what's going to happen. I mean, like all the unknowns that
It's
can
true
make
that
you,
change is change. And that there's a lot of times people don't do it because, they're trying to run from change. But
mhm,
if you can really delve into how the change is better and envision it and know that that's what you want, then it isn't so bad that there
yeah,
isn't that major discomfort. It's actually something you want. But if change is forced upon you, then that's pretty uncomfortable.
sure.
We don't like
So,
that. Our brains
no,
resist that. We have built-in features
mhm.
to resist that.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. You mentioned Freud a little while ago, and I know that a lot of modern psychotherapy is based on Freud, and then also a lot of people are discovering that there is a lot that he put forth that either is just isn't right anymore. We don't view it as right, but
I had an
I know
instructor
that's
I had
yeah.
an
Sorry, go
instructor
ahead.
when I first started my graduate study courses who said everything we know is wrong. But we have to start somewhere, right?
Right,
so
right, right,
so
right.
as
And
we learn, we modify and we've come a long ways from Freud. So
sure, yes. but he also gave, he gave us the framework to start thinking about things.
Indeed.
But one of the things that he talked about, and this is just like armchair psychology Liz, but he talked a lot about how we developed our personalities and our neuroses when we were very young. And that part is true, is my understanding, right? A lot of personality disorders develop really, really early on in our
Well,
development.
there's reasons for those developings. And
Right.
there might be some genetic predisposition in particular directions. And then your environment plays a huge role
Yeah.
in that development, of those development phases in there. So, by the time you get to adulthood, you could be dealing with some issues that are pretty difficult to overcome. And that's where counseling and psychotherapy and those kind of things can come in very handy
Right. Because a lot of
and
these
help
things
you to.
started like before we were even pre-verbal, right? Like we developed defense
It can.
mechanisms. Yeah, it
It can.
can.
It really depends a lot on the factors that I think when you have a baby come fresh out of the womb, that it doesn't come out pre-programmed with that. It can come out
Mhm.
with predisposition for that, meaning it's easier to slide in that direction,
Mhm.
but not predetermination. You don't come
Right.
out come out from the womb saying, "Hey, you're going to grow up to be a narcissist."
Right. Right. Right.
That's
Right.
I don't believe that. It's
But
but you can have a
so
predisposition for it.
sure. And I think well, the reason that I bring this up is obviously I think about it a lot. It's really interesting to me. Um, it's a puzzle, right? Like why do some people develop personality disorders or are prone to them? Why are some people resilient even when they have a ton of adversity? Why do people develop different coping mechanisms, right? And different strengths and different like weaknesses or challenges. Like some people are prone to be like hyper alert, some people are prone to be hyper vigilant, some people are prone to be like very um like avoidant, and some people, conflict avoidant, passive aggressive, like afraid to be say what they think. Some people are really controlling.
Right.
People develop these different sort of ways of, I think, just sort of helping them cope, helping them understand who they are in relationships and in society, and helping them feel safe, even if sometimes those coping mechanisms aren't really the most healthy for you. Um, that to
Well,
me is like stuff that,
you've really touched on a lot of areas. You've touched on, society and culture and family and all of the things that help to shape us and to grow our brains into particular directions and strengthen different areas and weaken others, if you want to look at it that way. And they're deep questions. There's whole fields of science around what you're talking about. And we do our best to help people to develop the things like resilience, like you're talking about there. And there's like I'll give you a little taste of some new neuroscience that I just learned myself, which I absolutely love. So they're doing some research out at Penn State in Pennsylvania, and Martin Siegelman is one of the researchers out there that has done significant research toward what creates happiness in human lives. And one of the things that they've discovered from the neuroscience perspective is that there's this little bitty structure in the brain called the dorsal aphae. And that little structure, and I mean, it's small. They've identified it in rats and they've identified it in humans. In rats, it's only about 50,000 cells. In humans, it's only about 150,000 cells. This little bitty structure in our brain has a direct connection to the prefrontal cortex. And what they've discovered is that when this little structure is engaged, then we experience helplessness. And when it is suppressed, that we experience hopefulness. Now, how do you excite or suppress that structure isn't known. We're not there yet. but there is this structure that has proven itself to be helpful or helpless or hopeful.
Wow.
So now you're
Wow.
talking now. So now let's take that into the concepts of all of those questions that you were asking. Which areas of the brain are going to be complicit in building resilience and giving people the ability to bounce back from different things easier, and which areas of the brain are causing people to get stuck in those different types of behaviors, and then create that whirlpool effect that makes it even worse for them, to where they start producing even more negative types of behavior. These are the things that we're trying to figure out through neuroscience and bring to the forefront, and then figure out literally how can we change these. So
Yeah,
it's fascinating material.
it is. I could just talk about it all day. I love it so much. I am grateful that I know people like you who can explain things to me and help me understand better. It's so fun to talk to you. I really am grateful that you're spending time with me. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for inviting me. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate it. It's been a tremendous amount of fun to be here and to
Good.
get to talk
Yeah.
about it. You're right. I can
Hey,
talk about it.
so if you want to, if maybe like if you put this in the Zoom chat or on Facebook chat, how people can find you and how they can learn more and
I don't think the Zoom chat will show up.
no, but if you put it in there, I can copy it because I've like shared this on several different groups on Facebook and I can go, and I think I have to go into the individual groups and like comment in each group. Do you know what I mean? So I can just copy and paste it if you put it all in there.
So you can reach me through qualitascoaching.com, which is Latin for quality. So you can figure
Ah,
quality coaching,
that's
qualitascoaching.com.
a good name. That's a good word.
And
Okay.
and if you go to my website on qualitascoaching.com, then you can click on the discovery session and set up a
Okay.
time to have an individual meeting with me. And I have free consultations with people. Gives you the opportunity to have a chance to get to know me. I can get to know you, and we can see if we're a match for helping you to move forward into the goals of your life.
Okay. I hope that everyone who hears this calls you because it's like something that I'm just going through now and putting this in all the different groups where I am.
Now, there's two
Um,
different things that I do. I do one-on-one coaching,
okay.
which is very specific and focused on an individual. And then I have my 16-week program, which is called Harnessing Happiness. And in that
Mm,
16-week program, that's the one where we really dive down into exactly what's going on in the brain, exactly what we can expect from from the typical behavior patterns that we produce. This is just being human that we do, and how we could interrupt those and change them, and produce through the mindful and purposeful behavior change, produce those behavior changes. And in that program also, there's a significant amount of one-on-one coaching that comes with that program. So
mm,
that's the main one. I do have a group that's running right now in it, and I'll probably be starting a new group next month. And so there's limited space because we do a lot of group coaching in there as well. I have found that people gain a tremendous amount of benefit when they do things within a group, and they're able to share their thoughts and
hmm.
their successes and their not successes. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of support that happens from that. So we have group, we have one-on-one, and then we have where we have our learning modules. We also bring in the full body experience, because our even though we're dealing with the mind, we're also dealing with our bodies. So we need to make sure and include that in as well. So it's a pretty comprehensive program, and it goes for 16 weeks. And
Wow.
I do want to get a group started, or at least get, some of the people lined up for it, so that we can get a set in stone start date on there. Because once we start running that one, it'll be, a little while before we start another one. So we
Yeah.
do have some openings still, and I'd love to get some people started. So click on that button, get a discovery session going. Let's have a conversation and see if we can't find you your path and harness your happiness.
That sounds so good. Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you,
love
Liz.
talking to you. All right. I guess I'm going to sign off here on Zoom and go through all the different Facebook groups and see if we're still going there, if I need to turn it off there or something.
See if we're still
I don't
live.
know. Yeah. Yeah. All righty, Juanita. Take care. Have a
All
great
right,
evening.
take care, Liz. Look forward to next time.
Bye.